Oh boy, are we going to have fun today? Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. I'm Mick, your host with the most, just ask your girlfriends and your wives. And welcome to my daily video, because today we're going to imagine we're Amazon. And we're going to imagine we're Amazon in a big plush office planning the future of the brand new James Bond franchise. You can follow me on X, Twitter, at Movies TV Mad, and on Instagram, and on Threads at Movies TV Mad X, on TikTok Mad Mickey's World, and on Snapchat BMouth60. Mick, your host with the most. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to imagine we're Amazon. We're going to pretend I'm Jeff Bezos. I've got the bald head, right? Yeah. Let's imagine I'm Bezos and we are plotting the future of the James Bond franchise. Now, as I predicted from the very beginning, that Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson would clash with Amazon, they wouldn't get on, and they'd be retired off. That's what happened. Now, something very interesting happened. Amazon suggested to Broccoli that they should do a Miss Moneypenny spin-off, and she used some expletives. She got very, very angry because she's very old school. That's not how her and her father developed the franchise. They'd make a film every 2, 3, maybe even 5 years, even longer than that. She wasn't interested in that. But let me ask you a question right here, right now. Would a Miss Moneypenny spin-off be such a bad idea? Because at the end of the day, what we have to accept here, that an online shopping company and a streaming service own MGM and James Bond. There is nothing we can do about that. They're going to want spin-off. They're going to want content, right? That's what they're going to do. That's the future. We are in this streaming franchise cinematic universe now, and this is what they're going to want to do with Bond. They're going to want to Marvelize it. But just because you do a bunch of spin-offs, it doesn't mean they have to be bad. Just because you're going to do streaming shows, it doesn't mean they have to be bad. If you're going to do a Miss Moneypenny spin-off, then at least make it great. We've got to throw this term strong woman in the bin, right? Because the public, men and women, are fed up of hearing it, right? Character is about soul. It's about personality. It's about putting personality down in the page, and it's about an actor projecting that personality and soul, right? So a Miss Moneypenny spin-off could be quite interesting. For me, if I was given that project, I wouldn't be focusing on her in the present day. I would want to analyze her and see, how does she get to becoming Miss Moneypenny, the assistant to M? If you did an M spin-off, right? Because Miss Moneypenny and M are a code name, right? And you can just go to their journey and you can make them interesting characters. But if you ask me, and imagine I am Jeff Bezos, how would I develop this franchise? What I've always wanted to do with James Bond, because here's the thing, right? We are not in the 60s, we're not in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or even the early noughties. We are in 2025. It is the 21st century. And we can't have women prancing around half naked with no brains, acting like bimbos. We are not there anymore. That is not acceptable. And I know there's a few older James Bond fans, my age, I'm 52 by the way, who thinks we should just go back to that. They were the good old days. Well, not necessarily for the women, right? So, and don't get it twisted, classic Bond had quite a few intelligent, independent Bond girls. But even the term Bond girl is offensive to a lot of people. Now, one thing we saw from 24 and the Bourne franchise, that people really enjoyed seeing a character become this onion layer. And the more you peel, the more interesting and emotional those onion layers and those onions become. And I think this is the way we have to go with Bond. Now, I'm not suggesting we make James Bond Jack Bauer or Jason Bourne, but we just can't have one-off adventures. We have to make this character interesting. He has to have a connective tissue via the streaming spin-offs and the cinematic movies. And this is my idea. This has always been my idea. So what we do, before we do a movie, we would greenlight a young James Bond series. Now, I've never read a James Bond novel. Well, you're not a real fan then, Mick. Yes, I am. I love the movies. Shut up. So, I think the origin story for Bond is his parents, in the books, died in a rock climbing accident. So my idea in my young James Bond series pilot is that James Bond, let's say he's a teenager, right? Let's just say he's a teenager. James Bond and his parents have been targeted for assassination. Now, I don't know why. At this point, I'd have to develop that idea and play with it and make it something. But they've all been targeted for assassination. So they're on this rock climbing holiday and someone's about to shoot all three of them. But the parents get shot, but James Bond gets away. So James Bond is now pursued by Spectre and MI6 or MI5 or whatever they are, right? So every episode of this series, he's on the run. And each week, he helps someone out, you know, in a different place. You know, imagine the Incredible Hulk TV series where David Banner goes from place to place and has an individual standalone story, but there's a through line. There's an arc where he's still being pursued. Now, what you have to do is make a decision here. Is he going to be on the run with someone, you know, maybe another, like a girl his age? Could that be interesting? Could the future Miss Moneypenny be on the run with Bond? Could we create a beautiful love story, kind of a Clark and Lana, you know, love story in this James Bond series? If you're a Smallville fan, you know what I'm talking about. And where they're on the run together. And we see this love story develop as they're on the run on their own, as they're pursued by the government, MI6, and, you know, Spectre. His parents were shot in front of him. So it's a kind of Batman scenario, if you like. Bruce Wayne saw his parents murdered. So I think because in the books his parents died in a rock climbing accident, if they die, if they're murdered during a rock climbing accident, you're not changing up the origin story. Suddenly, James Bond has a very, very interesting backstory. And this young James Bond series would be his backstory. And then we get to the first movie in our new Amazon Prime James Bond franchise, right? Because if you make this decision, basically you are starting again. Daniel Craig's Bond is dead. We've already left the original continuity, right? So we're doing something new here. So for me, as Jeff Bezos, what I would be saying is I want the young James Bond series to be the history of our James Bond movie. This older James Bond now, let's say he's 25, 30, his backstory is this James Bond series. So this young James Bond series is connected to the movies. And, you know, we'd have to connect a few things together and do it. So they would be connected. So already, you've got one spin-off and you've got the movies. And you start working on the movie. And then you create another spin-off. And 2 or 3 spin-offs, but you do it slowly. You wouldn't just throw spin-offs out there. You've got to do your young James Bond streaming show, and it's got to be connected to the movies. And by having a young James Bond on the run, all of a sudden, you create a situation. You develop him. He goes through a lot of bad things while helping people from week to week. You create a character who isn't weary yet because he's a teenage boy. Maybe he's slightly more pure, but look, however rough and ready James Bond is, James Bond deep down is a good person. James Bond is a hero. But through this series, we're going to get to know him. Because as I say, we can't do what they did when we were younger. There needs to be a point of interest. And to develop this character as a young teenager to an older Bond in the movies and have both young James Bond series and the movies connected is a point of interest, and it would connect the audience. It would, it would make people interested. Because at the end of the day, as I say, this is a streaming service that owns James Bond now and MGM. They're going to want spin-offs. They're going to want content. And just because you're creating a connected universe, it doesn't mean automatically it has to be bad, that it has to be a negative. And the reason fans don't want this, because they know what's around them. They already know what new entertainment has done to other great iconic properties. Now, if I was in charge of this franchise, that wouldn't be the case. Now, there's a lot of people who want Henry Cavill to play James Bond. There's also a fandom who would love to see Pierce Brosnan return as Bond. If you do that, then you return to the original continuity, which I'm not against, by the way. To bring back Pierce Brosnan, I think he was retired off by Broccoli and Wilson too soon. It was outrageous what they did to him. They were obsessed with the reboot. They brought in Daniel Craig, and, Broccoli was obsessed with Daniel Craig. Oh, Daniel! The woman had an orgasm every time she said his name. It was a bad joke, wasn't it? So they retired Pierce off too soon. Now, as long as he's fit enough to do it, it could be interesting. I mean, could it be one film? Could it be a trilogy of films for Pierce's James Bond? So that's another option that I'm not against. But if they don't want to do that, yes, I absolutely would want to see a young James Bond TV show, streaming show, and I'd want his backstory to connect up with the movie. That's always been my idea, and I like the idea of him being on the run, him and his parents being targeted for assassination, and I think that's an interesting thing. If you look at basically the young James Bond show could kind of be, I mean, you could even do it differently. You could do a Smallville setup where he's a teenage boy and he's going to school and he's having little adventures and he's got friends. You could do that as well. You could have him being friends with Blofeld, a bit like what they did with Smallville, with Lex Luthor, which was a great concept, but they executed it in the right ways. It's all right having great ideas. There's lots of great things you can do with a young James Bond show. But here's the thing. When you've got an old iconic property, some people are not going to want change. But we are in 2025. You can't do it the way they used to do it. But a big decision has to be made here. Is our new James Bond franchise going to be set in the modern day, or do we set it in the past? Do we set it in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, or the 80s? I think if we set it in the 60s, then there's a lot of room to grow as well. So I think at the moment, I would say, let's set it in the past. If you set James Bond, if you make James Bond a period piece, then you don't have to be so modern. You don't have to worry about modern ideals, but you also have to respect women. Now, I'm not the biggest fans, one of the biggest fans of Phoebe Waller-Bridge and her being absolutely everywhere, her writing and performing in everything. I don't like that idea. I don't think she's the talent that new Hollywood thinks she is, but she said a good thing about James Bond when she was rewriting the No Time to Die script. She was asked if James Bond should treat women better. And she said, he can treat women badly, but we can't. Yeah, Phoebe, I agree with that. We can't treat women badly, but Bond can. But you've got to understand how James Bond sees women. He's not necessarily a sexual predator. What he is, he's a secret agent. People are a means to an end to him. He uses them. And he's going to use men as well, right? Now, people won't want to hear this, but James Bond probably has to sleep with men as well as women, right? To get, if there's, let's say he meets a gay gentleman, but he needs some information from that gentleman, it's not always a case of him torturing that person, torturing the truth out of them. Maybe he'll have to seduce the men as well as the women. It's the modern world, everyone, and some of you will be offended by that. But here's the thing. If you want a big audience for Bond, look, James Bond movies keep on making money whether they're bad or good. People want to watch more James Bond. but we have to make a contemporary, modern day Bond, whether people like it or not.